Well, namaste and welcome back to the Hindu American Foundation's Virtual Advocacy Forum 2022. I'm pleased to introduce the moderator for our final panel discussion of the day on Women's Rights Are Human Rights, Suhag Shukla, co-founder and executive director of the Hindu American Foundation. Ms. Shukla holds a BA in religion and JD from the University of Florida and has helped steer the foundation to being recognized as a leading voice for civil rights, human rights, and religious freedom. She's been instrumental in the development of a broad range of educational materials and position papers and blogs for a variety of platforms. She serves on religious advisory committees for the Council on Foreign Relations, the Humane Society of the United States, and the Department of Homeland Security's Subcommittee for the Prevention of Targeted Violence Against Faith-Based Communities, and is a member of the First Amendment Center's Committee on Religious Liberty and the United Nations Women's Gender Equality and Religious Platform. Without further ado, Ms. Suhag Shukla.
Thank you, Samir, and thank you everyone for joining us. What an incredible morning so far, afternoon, wherever you're tuning in from. We've had some spirited discussions about a variety of topics, and this panel promises nothing less or short of what we've already had the privilege of experiencing. So in the many narratives about India and Hindus, women are oftentimes sidelined and absent altogether, particularly in discussions about human rights. But women's rights are fundamental human rights. Our panelists today will share their insights on the successes and challenges for women in India, particularly in the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir. Joining us today are two incredibly accomplished women whose extensive bios will be shared in the chat. Yana Mir is editor-in-chief of the Real Kashmir News, and Manu Khajuria is a freelance writer and storyteller and founder of Voice of Dogras. Thank you both for being with us here today. Manuji is in the UK, Yana is in India, so appreciate the time that you're taking, and meeting us at our mid-morning or mid-afternoon. We will also have some time at the end for audience Q&A, and we'll try to take as many questions as we can. Please enter your questions in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. A friendly reminder that today's presentation cannot be recorded, shared, or otherwise disseminated in whole or in part without the express written consent from the Hindu American Foundation. With that out of the way, let's just jump right into it. Yana, much has been said about the abrogation of Article 370 by the international media. And the predominant refrain has been one of being a wholesale deprivation of Kashmiri rights. So my first question for you is, can you talk a little bit about the status of Muslim women prior to the abrogation of Article 370? If you could unmute yourself. Thanks.
Thank you so much for your question. And I truly appreciate all the energy that's going in to understand what women went through and what they rose out of when the Article 370 was abrogated, how that actually affected women, in what way. That's a very practical question and a very necessary one. And the world must know what Kashmiri women went through and how they suffered before the Article 370 was abrogated. So I'll start with, it would be really horrifying for many of you to know, to find out that in certain districts like Kupwara, which are on the border, right, with Pakistan, Kupwara was a hotbed of infiltrations. And in fact, I would say that the jihad against India actually started from there. And women in Kupwara were forced to give up one child from their family just for the purpose of being recruited in that jihad. So to be recruited as a soldier to hate his own country, one son of every family had to be given up. And who gets most affected by that? The mother, the woman. Women, especially in the district of Baramulla, they're now opening up and coming out with horrifying stories of how they had to indulge in non-consensual sex with these so-called jihad fighters. Now, why do I say so-called? Because jihad isn't what they fabricated it to be. Jihad simply and purely means, jihad in Islam simply and purely means the art of survival in the most difficult situations.
Mm-hmm.
It does not imply hating a population of people because they belong to another religion. But that was what was being implied. Kashmiri women were forced to believe that by indulging in non-consensual sex with jihadis, they're doing a service to God.
Mm-hmm.
And they were molested, they were raped, they had to indulge in non-consensual sex, they even had to get pregnant without getting married, and all of that. And that happened mostly, the most affected area was the Baramulla district of North Kashmir. And then we come down to the central zone. So the central Kashmir, especially Budgam and Srinagar, was most affected by this organization that was run by a lady called Asiya Andrabi. Her organization was called Dukh Tarane Millat. And she ran the organization with a group of abaya-clad women who undertook to do moral policing of the Kashmiri women. And a Kashmiri woman was judged at every point in life. If she decided to choose her own life partner, if she decided to choose her own career option, if she decided to have a say in a property dispute, if she decided to marry a non-Kashmiri, or if she decided to even indulge, to even choose to play sports, all that was not allowed. All that was prohibited for women. And Dukh Tarane Millat ladies were always there to ensure that every woman in Kashmir followed these rules. And if someone dared to break the rules, they would be pulled out. And I have witnessed this as a child at my neighbor's place. So she was, the neighbor's daughter was pulled with her, her hair, pulled out of her house, and black paint was mulled all over her face. And then she was kicked on the road in front of everyone, and no one could say anything because Dukh Tarane Millat was the self-proclaimed moral policing body for women that existed. And yes, so one of the plus points of abrogation of Article 370 is that Asiya Andrabi, who was behind Dukh Tarane Millat, has been jailed, and she still remains in jail, much to the relief of Kashmiri women. When we talk about women who could not choose sports as an option, who could not choose acting or modeling or any glamour-related profession as an option, when we think of those days and when we think of the days today, when we have scores of women like Tajamul Islam, Ishrat Akhtar, Sadia Tariq, they're all coming out and making their country proud in the sports field. But that's another story. That's about today. We're talking about what we went through, right?
Yeah.
So
let me just ask you this before I ask Manuji about the status of women, Hindu women specifically. But a lot of the things that you've shared with us, Yana, are the actions of non-state actors. What was the response of the state, or what was the response of local law enforcement? And I just want to add a comment that, oftentimes we think of, and this is what complicates, I think, the status of women, is that we oftentimes think of the perpetrators of just being men. But you just shared with us, there are instances where women are subjugating other women, and those types of complexities never make it into any sort of mainstream narratives or reportage.
So I'll tell you what.
Yeah, non-state actors.
Yeah, you again, that's a good question. Yeah. How did the state help us? That's what you're trying to ask?
Exactly.
Well, they didn't. Because quite frankly speaking, the democracy of India is definitely one of its biggest powers, you could say. But it's also one of the biggest weaknesses of its subjects. So what happens is those who are in power, for example, we had Mr. Farooq Abdullah Sahab. So whenever he himself is a secular man, and he has a broad-minded school of thought, but he needed his votes, so he would not go against those people who were psyching people to follow them in the name of Islam. So he although he wanted to, he tried to break all of this, and especially since his own daughter married a non-Kashmiri and a non-Muslim, which was a very big taboo in the Kashmiri society. So he had to survive all that and continue to be in politics. So there was just no way he could go against the Hurriyat, right. which used to like psychologically and emotionally, in the name of Islam, force the women to go out on the streets instead of studying or staying home and teaching their children or going to work. It would force these women to go out on streets and pelt stones at security personnel and do things like that. And there was no way that the existing politicians could do anything to stop this, although they knew that women are not in a good state. They even if they chose to marry, even if they chose to run away from the state and marry somebody of their choice, for example, well, they could never come back, and they could not have a claim on their parents' properties. They could not, neither could they inherit, nor could they pass on anything to their children from a man who was not a Kashmirian, who was not a Muslim.
Right.
So this was the level of isolation and the level of emotional and mental torture and intellectual torture that Kashmiri women was going through prior to the abrogation of 370.
So, Manu, if you work with a subset, and we'll get to that later, a subset of Hindu women, but could you tell us a little bit more broadly about Hindu women in general? What was their status prior to the abrogation of Article 370?
Thank you, Suhag, and thank you to HAF for inviting me. Well, to put it very simply, before the abrogation, it was the state government itself. It was basically the institutionalization of discrimination against women in Jammu and Kashmir. Because here was the state saying that you are not equal to the males of Jammu and Kashmir, and we will not give you the full rights, what you deserve under what you're guaranteed under the Indian Constitution. We are not going to give you that. You're going to be a lesser human being because you will not have full rights, as in what prior to 2002, because I'll come to a certain legislation in 2002, which only as a token changed a few things. But prior to that, Article 35A in particular, which allowed the Jammu and Kashmir government to define who could be or would be a permanent resident of the state, very clearly stated that any woman of Jammu and Kashmir who married a non-PRC, a permanent residence, you have a permanent residence card. And if you're not a PRC holder, if you marry a non-PRC holder, you will not be able to continue with your full rights. So the minute a woman married, so her domicile was basically merged with the domicile of her husband. Now, this was an act which was also prevalent in England, but it was removed. There was a very famous case, Formosa versus Formosa. They called it a barbaric relic of the Dark Ages, and rightly so. But this barbaric relic of the Dark Ages continued in Jammu and Kashmir till 2019, where the minute, and I am a victim of Article 35A because I married a non-PRC holder. I married an Indian citizen from another part of the country, but because he was a non-PRC, I lost my rights. Now in 2002, because this is a falsehood which many separatists try to peddle and try to counter us, they say, no, that you had the rights, but then they were not the full rights, as in there was a legislation in 2002. There was a very famous Sheila Sahani case. She, along with other petitioners, had fought this in the courts. And according to that, this little token that was granted to the women was that you can, you can inherit property, you can buy property, but you cannot pass on your inheritance to your children. or to your spouse. Effectively, a mother whose children cannot inherit ancestral property, who cannot get a job in any government institution, cannot study in a government-run school or a college, and cannot avail any schemes, any beneficial schemes, central or state, or even stand for elections, she was being effectively again rendered homeless, or rather driven away from the state. So this was 2002. So I did have rights, but my state subject, which earlier had a stamp, I had this for a long time. I still have it. It's a relic of that, or rather, I would say a little reminder of what we went through. It has a valid until marriage stamped on it. So it is a PRC, but a valid until marriage. But then after 2002, yes, I had the rights, but I couldn't pass it on. So this was the sham. And I, being a Hindu woman, and with our rules of, exogamy, we, especially Dogra women of the Jammu region, were getting married into Dogra families. This is Dogra families are also living in Himachal Pradesh and some districts of Punjab. Were getting married into Himachal Pradesh or into Punjab or anywhere else in the country. They would be effectively, driven away from the state. So this was not only happening to women like me, and there are 6 other cousins of mine, female cousins of mine, who also were victims of this, but especially to women of the Dalit Samaj, of the Valmiki Samaj, them and the women of the West Pakistani refugee community. They were especially affected because the Valmiki Samaj, let me go into the context of this, or a little backstory. They were brought into Jammu and Kashmir from Punjab in 1957 when there was a sweepers union strike in Jammu. And they said, and because they couldn't reach a solution, they brought this more than 200 families into Jammu and Kashmir, telling them that you would be given permanent residence status, but they added a very diabolical clause saying that you could only be sweepers. You could not change your profession. Wow. Later on, the second generation PRC holders of this Valmiki Samaj said, now we want PRC, because there is a very famous example of this young girl, Radhika Gill, a very, very good athlete from Jammu region. She qualified for a recruitment drive by some central agency in Jammu, and they asked her for a PRC, a permanent residence certificate, and she said she didn't have one. So she was basically debarred from taking anything which would probably lead to the, social upward mobility for her family, for her community. These people, the Valmiki Samaj and the women, could have no aspirations, no hopes, no ambitions, or any hope for a better future for their children, because they were being pushed into intergenerational, I would say, slavery. Because all they could do was, you could only be a sweeper from the Valmiki Samaj. Right. And then on the other hand, you had women from the West Pakistani refugee community, Hindu women. Almost, I believe there were like more than 60,000 families came into Jammu and Kashmir on 18th September 1947. 60,000 families had come in. So you had these families who came in and were told that, Sheikh Abdullah said, you cannot come into Kashmir. You will have to settle in the Jammu region. Though he was open about the idea of Uyghur Muslims coming into Kashmir, but the Hindus couldn't come and settle in Kashmir. And he said, I will give you, they were also promised that they would be given PRC status, but it never happened. So again, a group of Hindu women from the West Pakistani refugee community who could never, ever, get into government jobs, get into government educational institutions, any of the schemes they couldn't avail. They had, no rights. So you were basically women's rights to equality, women's rights to having a future, which were guaranteed under the Indian Constitution, were not extended to the women of Jammu and Kashmir. And so what I find extremely problematic is that across the world and across India, the champion of women's rights never, ever spoke about it. There was deafening silence about this.
Right. And, I think, for an American audience, what women in Kashmir were facing was the equivalent of, if I was born and raised in California and suppose inherited the property of my parents, but I married, which I did, married a Floridian, I would lose essentially my rights to the land. That's kind of what we're talking about. That's how the setup was. And you bring up just a follow-up in terms of the Indian Constitution guaranteeing it. So is it safe or fair to say that the legal status of women in the former state of Jammu and Kashmir was different than any other state in India?
Yes, absolutely. Because women elsewhere had this right to equality. They were equal to the men. So I'll give you another example. For example, Farooq Abdullah, the former chief minister of Jammu and Kashmir, was married to a British citizen. And because he was a male, he could transfer the domicile rights to his British wife. But I, as an Indian woman, as a domicile from Jammu and Kashmir, could not do the same for my spouse. And he passed it on to Omar Abdullah, who went on to fight elections, and he became the chief minister. So this was a peculiar thing only for Jammu and Kashmir.
Okay. So, it has been just a little over a month on the third anniversary of the abrogation. So let's shift kind of our focus to the present. And Yana, if you can share with us, what is the situation like for Muslim women today in the Union Territory?
So like I already mentioned, women now have the freedom to choose their own life partners. Women who used to live in such a rigid and regressive environment where they couldn't even click their pictures, they couldn't even take selfies, they're now free. They're free to choose their own careers. They're free to play sports. And like I said, we've got so many sports, women sports achievers in Kashmir now. In the last 2 years, they've emerged. The names that I took. Women are shining in almost every career. We have actors coming out of Kashmir, who are working in the Indian film industry now. And there is a new level of confidence. There's still a lot of awareness work to be done. For example, I visited a couple of girls' colleges, and they had no idea that after the abrogation of Article 370, there are so many things that have, the government has introduced for them, and for the first time in Jammu and Kashmir. For example, the right to menstrual safety and hygiene in hospitals, the right to proper nursing conditions in hospitals. There are so many rights that were being implemented in the rest of India, but were not part of Jammu and Kashmir, that were not being followed. And these girls have no idea that things have changed for them. So a lot of work still needs to be done. We need to go reach out to women in the far-flung areas and let them know what their new rights are. That has to be done. But that said, yes, there's a new wave of freedom, a new wave of liberation, which the women of Jammu and Kashmir are enjoying today, because there was a time when Kashmir, I won't say much about Jammu because I've never lived there, but Kashmir was on its way to becoming another Afghanistan. It's safe to say that. It was on its way. And I would say that the government of India has saved the women of Kashmir from that plight. I'm really thankful to the government of India for making this brave decision that, like I said, it was democracy that turned out to be the biggest fault line, the vote bank, due to which former governments of India could not take a decision like that, despite knowing the regressive environment in which women were living. Despite knowing all of that, not much was being done to change things because of all this, because of the vote bank politics. Right. But I'm very grateful that this decision has been taken. Those who were being wrongful with women are now behind bars, and you would notice that there's not a single person who's asking for these people to be released. Whether it's Yasin Malik, who inflicted the highest level of torture on Kashmiri Pandits, or whether it's Asiya Andrabi, who is the head of Duftarane-Millat. No one in Kashmir today is asking for or expecting them to be released from prison. And that just shows that the people of Kashmir were not happy in that regressive environment. It's not like this is what they wanted. And it's not like that the Indian government is trying to do some kind of demographic change or trying to change the ethos. That was not acceptable to the people of Kashmir, especially to the women of Kashmir. What was going on was not acceptable. And, they're just breathing, this is ushered in a new era, and we feel like we're breathing free now.
Well, that's good to hear. Good to hear. So, Manu, how about we talk about Hindu women, and maybe specifically, you touched about the Dogra community, but can you tell us more about how the abrogation of Article 370 has directly impacted women in your community?
Yes, as I pointed out earlier, Suhag, that many of the women from my community marry outside the state, also because there is a Dogra community in Himachal Pradesh, North Himachal Pradesh, as well as some districts in Punjab. So these women were really badly impacted. Many of them were just, single child of their parents who needed to get back at some point and take care of their parents, continue to, make a living in Jammu, maybe once again, and they couldn't do that. So there were so many, the consequence was so deep and so spread across, even for that matter, Kashmiri Hindu women. The fact that they had to go into, they were forced to leave the valley, the community is dispersed. Many of the Kashmiri Hindu women have married outside the state or have married non-PRC holders by virtue of the fact that they do not live in their homeland. So many Kashmiri Hindu women were also approaching me saying that they have no rights and they want to be connected to their homeland. But this particular very disabling legal clause was, not letting them be a part of the state, continue to come back home, or give them an option to come back home. So definitely this has really made a huge difference to all the Hindu women. And I would like to quickly point out what Yana said. The kind of leadership that we have, even amongst women in Kashmir, be it religious or political, that was very exploitative of the women of Jammu and Kashmir. You had a Mehbooba Mufti, a former CM, who actually, she and her party in 2004 tried to bring in a legislation. This was a disqualification bill, which wanted to reverse the token 2002 legislation, which allowed women to have, the PRC, but not, of course, pass it on to their children. So she, despite being a woman, wanted to disqualify these women from being a part of the state. So again, she being disempowered now means so many other women in Kashmir, as well as definitely in Jammu region, have been empowered. Because if you look at the DDC elections, this is the smallest or one of the smaller administrative units, the District Development Corporation. The DDC elections took place and 450 women participated. They were in the fray for these different posts. And there is now a 33% reservation for women as chairpersons of the DDC. So you have around 6 women DDC chairpersons, out of which I think there is one Sikh woman from North Kashmir, Rafiabad, who's out of the 3 Sikh candidates, DDC candidates. She's one of them. So you can see that women have already started participating more actively in the political process. They are taking part in elections. They feel more comfortable. Reservations have been, brought in place so that they can participate and they can get an equal chance. I've spoken to women from Rajouri, Muslim women from Rajouri, Riyasi, Hindu women from the districts of Samba, Kathua, and Jammu. These are panches and sarpanches, so they are holding positions. They are holding positions of power. And as we know, women, when they hold positions of power, they bring so much to their communities, to their villages. And that change is pretty much visible across Jammu region, especially.
Let me ask both of you this question, and that is that, it sounds like the situation for women in Kashmir, regardless of religious background, regardless of community, was so unique, and in some way they were isolated from other women in India. Have you seen in your work the building of allyship because even if you have some of these structural impediments lifted, even if those the lifting of the structural impediments now allow for state, non-state actors to be kept in check, there are still underlying issues that women around the globe and in India face. So what has your experience been, if any, of allyship, say, cross-border in terms of the states? Is there any national women's movements that you both have been able to tap into or have seen your respective communities or any communities on the ground tapping into? Yana, if you want to go first, and then Manuji.
I'm not quite sure I get that question.
So what I'm asking is, if there's any national women's rights movements that Kashmiri women, now that kind of some of the most structural impediments are lifted, have been able to tap into, or is there scope for that sort of partnership, and what might that look like?
Okay. So, not necessarily women's rights groups, but a lot of NGOs have started. In fact, they used to exist even before, because they were aware of the conditions. Most women were not working because they were not allowed to leave the house and go out. And even like Manuji spoke about Mehbooba Mufti, she ended up becoming a chief minister. Fine. But why did she send her children to other states to study? Her daughters. Why did she not let her daughters stay with her in Kashmir? Why were they sent to other states? Because she knew that the conditions for women were not good. And that says it all. So, and that is why they have always been human rights organizations coming into Kashmir to, to help, try and help these women. But then they could never break out of this network, this tribal approval sort of thing. They could never break out of it and actually reach out. And they were so close. They were so scared of mingling with, NGOs that were coming in from other states. In fact, even that was looked upon as un-Islamic, that, okay, these are groups sent by the Indian government to convert you into Hindus. So it even happens today. So I personally know a Kashmiri Pandit woman who in fact was a victim of the exodus that happened in 1990. She was about 14 years old at that time. And she lived outside the state for like all her life after that. And now she's trained in yoga and all of that, and healing and all of that. And she wants to come back here and help the distressed people. Right. But even today, people are scared of connecting with her. And what she tells me is that they think that by doing breathing exercises and by doing yoga, they're actually converting into Hindus. So there's so much of stigma created in their minds that anything that they do might just go against their religion and will go against God, and they are liable, they've committed a punishable offense. So there's so much of that stigma inside them that still needs to be removed. So there's been very less foray of women's rights organizations coming to Kashmir, and I think it's time that should start. And that was it's good that you mentioned it, and I really think it's time to start, because there are a lot of women now that they're out of all that for the last 3 years, and now that those who are aware of their freedom, they know, okay, now we can be employed, now we can work, now we can get out of the house. But where do we go? So they're lost. They need, and I personally know so many people like that, so many women. They need a direction. They need guidance. They need funds to just, stand on their feet. They need training. They need skill training. Right. And there's not much of that happening right now. And I would really hope that it starts soon.
Absolutely. Manuji, how about you? And you mentioned that there are, Dogra communities in Himachal and other places. What are you seeing in terms of, championing the rights of one another, or kind of trying to integrate the cause of Kashmiri women into the broader cause of Indian women?
I think on this, Yana and I would be on the same page. There have been no attempts, no extension of any sort of, knowledge transfer or some sort of coming together, exchanging ideas, working together. Jammu and Kashmir has been very isolated, and outside actors have come in only when they have an agenda. So especially for Jammu region, whose political aspirations have been very clear, they've been aligned with the idea of Indian nationality, Indian nationalism. It was never important. It didn't suit anybody's purpose. And women in any situation of conflict, because Jammu has seen its pretty good share of, sorry to use that word, but a large share of terrorism, a lot of community killings, all this has happened, but the women have always been invisible. So I had approached many women prior to 2019, the abrogation. I'd approached many women. I'd approached many well-known feminists in Delhi University, in Mumbai, in all these urban places where women are free to talk about these things and had been talking about. And I said, why aren't you talking of this? And I would never get an answer. I was either ignored or there was absolutely, like, this is a subject we will not approach. So I think this has still not changed, in the sense that people still do not understand Jammu and Kashmir so well. So they are going to take some time before they really understand what the state is about, really feel comfortable, because many are also scared. Many are scared of coming into Jammu and Kashmir because they know so little. So it should happen. I agree with Yana. It should start happening. We should make those bridges. We should have these groups where women, because the exposure is less. The exposure is so less that if you go into Jammu and Kashmir, you'll be stunned by the lack of exposure, which should change. And I hope, Suhag, once again, by calling both Yana and me in today's session, I think you've already taken that first step. And I really have to thank you and HAF for that.
No. I would also like to add that I've been lucky that I've got the opportunity to actually go out and conduct certain drives. I mean, I would say that it was an initiative I did by myself, and I was happy to know that I could freely move around the streets and I could go to far-flung areas, and I reached out to women and they had no idea about personal hygiene and things like that. Right. So we went for this personal hygiene drive, and I've also tried to, do some drugs awareness campaigns, because a lot of our women are also that's one problem that's eating out of our women these days. Because depression and losing their men to terrorism and things like that, all that trauma that they've come out of. So and now they know that they have the freedom to be employed, but they don't have employment, and all of those things is leading them into drugs. And drugs is a big it's a big challenge that we're fighting for our women right now, and we definitely hope that we get help to deal with this, more help, because we really need to reach out to a lot of women out there, because they're still, like I said, still unaware about their rights. They're still unaware about what's good for them and what's not good, what they can do and what they can't. What are the things that, that is actually stigma, that's an illusion, and what is reality. They need to be made aware. And yeah, there haven't been much efforts for that, and I don't think individuals like me alone can actually manage. There have been a lot of individuals who are trying to do this on their own steam, but it will take some backing and some pushing.
Right, and hopefully as the security situation continually improves, those NGOs that have been active on the ground in other states will kind of have that pathway cleared in order to kind of spread their work, resources, knowledge, and all of that. Yana, what you started saying about your own personal experience is a good segue to my next question. But as your role as editor-in-chief, you are documenting history in real time. How has this role empowered you personally? And how would we encourage more women in the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir to assert their own narratives?
It has empowered me in a way that, I have got this opportunity as an editor-in-chief to bring out positive stories from Kashmir, stories of people who've achieved, stories of women who have achieved, because I think that before the abrogation of 370, in fact, before I took up my role as an editor-in-chief and before the abrogation of 370, the only news that would come out of Kashmir would be in a negative domain. It's about it's about deaths, it's about dissent, it's about it would always be about some sort of you get my point. Yeah. Whereas after the abrogation of 370 and after I became editor-in-chief, I think I can be proud to say that my organization, the Real Kashmir News, was one of the first to actually start documenting and bringing out true, real stories, not about killings and not about all of those things, but about what people, young people of Kashmir have started to achieve, and what kind of awards they're winning, what kind of, basically just anything that would, how they're celebrating festivals and things like that. So what we try to do is bring out the better side of Kashmir to the world. And what that does is it makes other people in Kashmir, when they read all of that happy stuff, it sort of encourages them to be positive as well.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like it's a game-changing thing, uh to come out of this world where it was all about dissent, and it was all about suppression and regression, and to step into a world which is full of promises. And when you see examples, of all those stories that I documented as an editor-in-chief, when they see all those examples, they feel motivated, and even they want to do something in life. So again, that chain continues, the chain of positivity. So I got the opportunity to spread that positivity, not only out of Kashmir and to the rest of the world, to the rest of India, where people had this opinion that every Kashmiri is dissentful about India, every Kashmiri is probably a stone pelter, or every Kashmiri is, uh, is just not happy with the idea of being a part of India. But then I got the chance to change that narrative when I documented, positive stories of people who were working towards integration with India and towards achieving something and making something out of their lives.
Yeah.
So
I was just going to say, I think that's a real direct response to this, prevailing notion that only bad news is news. Because bad news is news. That formula certainly isn't bringing us to more.
No, in fact, I would like to have you know that most of the news that people now like watching about Kashmir is about how many tourists, what was the tourist footfall this year. And surprisingly, this year saw the biggest footfall. Like, this was an unimaginable number of tourists actually visited the Kashmir Valley for the first time.
Yeah.
And also this year also saw the foray of Indian corporate houses investing in Kashmir. So Inox has opened 2 cinema halls, and that was something the people had forgotten about. Right. So if you're aware, there were no cinema halls in Kashmir after 1970 or something. Manuji would be able to say we had no cinema halls. And so this was I think the first corporate investment from India into Kashmir this year. And then we also had foreign investors coming to Kashmir. That was at the start of the year. So we had investors from Dubai who showed interest. So there's a lot of positive news that's coming out of Kashmir. And I was one of the first to, that's how I feel empowered, because I was one of the first to start documenting the positive stories from Kashmir.
Well, as someone who's gotten very jaded from all the negative news headlines, I personally thank you for that. Manuji, in your work, and you too are telling the stories and shaping narratives about life in Kashmir, and you've discussed a concept of dharmic femininity, which is something that's very close to my heart as well. Can you elaborate on what dharmic femininity is, and how this might help shift not just the narrative, but kind of the interreligious relations that we see on the ground in Jammu and Kashmir?
Well, Suhag, for me personally, storytelling was an important tool. In a way, it was an important tool not just to connect with my people, but also to talk about my people and tell their stories outside. Because especially for Jammu region, where I come from, and it is a larger region compared to the Kashmir region, the Kashmir Valley, it's got 10 districts. And very, very diverse this region is ethnically, linguistically, even, it's got many faiths. The problem was that there was something, what we Jammuites like to call Jammu blindness. Because the flashpoint was Kashmir, right. Jammu, which was a larger area and more diverse, more pluralistic. It continued to remain plural, even in the most, turbulent times, was completely ignored by media, by politicians, by the state, by the center, by everyone, which led to a very deep sense of identity crisis. So people were so overlooked and were so not used to being asked, what is your story? How are you feeling? You've also seen, terrorism. You've seen cross-border shelling. There were things happening in the shelters. You make these little shelters across the international border and across the LOC, which is the longer IB, the longer LOC is in Jammu region. There were things happening to the girls there. There is a history. There was a present, and there is a future, but nobody was interested. So I took the opportunity, or I took the chance to talk about history of the region, and especially its dharmic and civilizational past, to talk about my people, and with the hope that it would empower women, because Jammu region is steeped in the practice of Shaktism. So there is Adi Shakti and the worship of Shakti all across the region. There are so many Shakti shrines, and then there is the concept of deifying women. So you have Dati worship, which is like Kula Devi, but slightly different. So you have Kul Devis and then you have Dati. And these are stories of ordinary women who did something extraordinary. So you have a Bua Bhaga, who was actually an activist, who was fighting against the taxation system. Many hundreds of years back. So when I started looking at these folklores, I was like, wow, we had women from our region who were so strong, who were empowered, who had a political opinion. Suhag, I was just in a Times Now debate only an hour back, and one of the panelists actually turned towards the anchor and said, now you be a good girl, almost conveying that you can. Yeah, it was very funny, and it was extremely funny. But the thing is that this is the idea. A woman is not supposed to have a political opinion. She's not supposed to. When I started writing opinion editorials for Daily Excelsior, which is the largest selling English daily in Jammu and Kashmir, for a long time they thought, because my name is gender confusing, to be fair, Manu was a man, because a woman couldn't be writing articles on politics. So I took these stories, these folklores, and I've started talking about them. I write about them on my social media platforms. We have a little group called Voice of Dogras, again, telling positive stories and trying to be heard and trying to be visible. So dharmic femininity, when I looked at the alternative role models that we have in our region, you have this Sukrala Mata, who is the owner of the forests and the lands. She is the presiding deity. She is the protector. You have Babe Wali Mata, a form of Mahakali. She is the presiding deity of Jammu city. So there are all these towns and villages and cities are actually protected by women. They are not protected by men. And Dogra community is a very martial community. It's a warrior community. So we have had the greatest of warriors like General Zorawar Singh, who is famous for his Ladakh conquest. And Dogra warriors have gone up to Chitral and Tibet. And all these warriors have bowed down to women, manifestations of Adi Shakti. So by telling these stories, by hearing them, I feel empowered. I feel, this is me. There is a part of that in me as well. So I'm using these stories to sort of remind our people that this is who you are, especially the women, that this is who you are, because cross-border narco terrorism, which Yana was mentioning, is something which is affecting our girls, our young men, even in the Jammu region, and especially from the border village that I come from in Jammu district. So it's a way of, it's my way of telling them that you don't need to be this. This is your legacy. This is what you are. This is where you need to go, and this is the path you need to walk on.
Right. No, that's wonderful, and I too can at least share in having emails addressed to Mr. Suhag Shukla, having a name that's very unique, and people aren't quite sure as to how to address me. I'm going to now shift to audience questions. And so if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. And, Manuji, since you just kind of mentioned, and we've been talking about Dogra, because many of our viewers do know who the Dogra are, but if you could, give us a short history of who are the Dogra and how are they unique in the region?
Very hard to give a short history.
Yeah, I know.
Very quickly, it's a very unique ethno-linguistic group, and Jammu and Kashmir is our home. And to put it simply, the state that we see now, the map that we see of Jammu and Kashmir, including Ladakh, was carved out by the Dogras through, mountain warfares and military conquests, and they are warriors. And the last Dogra Jamwal dynasty, the Jamwal dynasty, the last Maharaja Hari Singh, was the one who signed the instrument of accession and integrated Jammu and Kashmir constitutionally and legally to India. So this is who the Dogras are, and they are in Himachal, but they basically Jammu is their heartland. Jammu is their heartland. And they are also in Pakistan occupied Jammu and Kashmir. So I meet a lot of POJKians here in the United Kingdom who are culturally more similar to me than a Kashmiri, because they speak my language or a form of my language, Dogri, dialect of my language. And even the written script of Dogri is Takri, which is coming off from Sharda script of Kashmir.
Okay.
So this is who Dogras are basically.
Thank you. Yana, a question for you. You are in Kashmir, you're working, you're reporting live from there. How safe do you feel? How safe do women feel in general? How free are women to go to school without fear? We did talk a lot about non-state actors and certainly a stronger legal system, a stronger presence perhaps of the central government has its pluses and minuses. Could you talk a little bit about all of that?
In the major cities, like in Srinagar and some other cities, it's very safe to go to schools. But I'm not sure if you know that in the villages, in smaller towns, before the abrogation, schools used to get burnt down. And there were two reasons for that. One is that they did not want to promote the government of India in Kashmir, so they wanted to burn down government schools. Another thing is they did not want women to get educated. So like I told you, it was on the way to becoming another Afghanistan. But then all that thankfully has stopped. So schools getting burnt down is not very encouraging for girls to, and I'm talking about especially girls' school getting burnt down, and that wasn't very encouraging for them. There have been many such cases. There was also a time when women's braids were being cut off, every time they stepped out of homes. So there have been very horrifying such incidents, and all of that has stopped. Although I still feel a lot of work still needs to be done. So there are many girls' schools, and I've had complaints from rural areas. People coming to me and saying that we have a girls' school in our area, but they have no toilets. They don't have any functioning toilets, or that the roof's leaking, and because of these reasons, or that the walls are not paneled, and because of these reasons, it gets very harsh in winters to actually, Kashmir has harsh winters, and to actually go there and study. So these are some reasons because of which girls of those certain areas are not going to school and they're not getting educated. And it's really sad that even though the government wills it, they're still not getting educated because of these rather trivial issues that should be dealt with on immediate basis. And also the Indian Army has been very, very supportive of girls' education, and especially in self-defense, education of self-defense. And they've actually conducted a few self-defense classes in some rural, in villages and all that. And the girls, I've actually spoken to those girls, and I've even interviewed them. And what they said is that they realized how important it is for girls to be, for girls to know self-defense. But every time they stepped out of homes to attend these classes, they would get eve teased on the way. They would get, they would, people would call out and, call them names and, just basically discourage them from going to, and say that it's haram and girls are not supposed to be doing these things. And then character assassination. And they, in fact, there was a time, I would say up until even 1 year ago, every girl who had a social media account, she'd get trolled mercilessly on social media. So there were a lot of things that the suppression was always there, and it's slowly all opening up. And so to come back to your question, I feel, like I said, there's a lot that needs to be done, and awareness needs to be spread.
Absolutely. This is a question for both of you, because I really do view this as kind of a universal challenge for women, and that is the women against women's interests. What kind of work in your respective communities is being done or can be done to address probably what to me is one of the most discouraging things about being an advocate for women's rights? Manuji, maybe you can go first, and then Yana.
I think just dialogue helps a lot, Suhag. So women talking to women makes a huge difference. Like, us three speaking here. Similarly, we had organized on Voice of Dogras, we had organized a dialogue between different sarpanch and panches of the Jammu district, rather the districts of Jammu region. And we got talking, we sort of heard what the problems were. There was definitely some sort of discrimination. Even though they were in these posts, the villagers were not being very supportive or cooperative. So there was a transfer of knowledge as to how this could be circumvented or how we could find solutions for this. So after that session, we all of us felt that if we continued to talk to each other and share our problems, we could collectively also look for solutions. So, and as both Yana and I have pointed out, because Jammu and Kashmir remained so isolated, we've not been talking to anyone from the outside because nobody has understood it or nobody has been courageous enough to want to understand it or take a stand. So this is all new for us. So I think starting from the fact that we talk amongst ourselves and then we also talk to women from outside Jammu and Kashmir, not just from India, but also abroad, I think that will make a lot of difference. There could be some sort of mentoring. There could be some sort of, groups where we are exchanging ideas, we telling our stories, learning how to articulate what is happening to us. That would be a very, very good beginning.
Right. Yana ji?
I think women against women is a problem that prevails everywhere. It's not just in Kashmir.
Exactly.
It's everywhere. It's also, you can see how much of it is in Iran right now. You can see what the Iranian women are going through and how they're protesting and how there's a bunch of women who are against them. And you've seen those visuals where, one woman says to another, oh, you're not wearing your hijab properly, so I'm going to show your video to the Revolutionary Guards and then see how they treat you. That is a problem, whether it's Afghanistan, Syria, or, Kashmir. And unfortunately, it prevails more in Islamic societies. I have no idea why. And I'm sorry, Manuji, but I don't think even talking to each other is going to help, because when you talk to each other, what these women who are against other women, what they do is they treat it like gossip and they actually use it against the women. So there's not much that comes out of it. I think, according to me, the only solution is that women who have a voice must not feel dejected just because some women are not supporting them. They must not feel dejected, and they must not stop. And they must continue to voice. They must continue to voice out. They must continue to be an example and continue to hope that with their example, more women would follow them as against women who follow those opponents. So I guess that if we up our own value and if we continue to keep speaking up for what is right, that's the only way. And if we're going to have more people support us as compared to the number of people that support those who oppose us, I think we've done our job, and that chain will continue.
Yanaji, here's a question from the audience. Do Kashmiri Muslims know about the civilizational past of Kashmir, like things like the origin of the name of Kashmir, which is Rishi Kashyap, or of Kashmir being the home of one of the oldest forms of Shaivism?
One answer: no.
Okay.
There has been so much told to them that is so misleading. So they're not even sure. They are suffering from this identity crisis. They're not even sure who they are. Okay, because like I said, they were not encouraged to go to government schools or any recognized institutions. They were even if they were educated, I'm talking about the rural people, even if they were educated, the history that was told to them was completely different from what actually happened in the world. So they were told that they have nothing to do with Hindus or Kashmiri Pandits. So there is no brotherhood with them. And they're actually a lost Jewish tribe from Israel. And they're so lost about it. They think that their roots are in Israel and there's some lost Jewish tribe that landed up in Kashmir. And they had no idea about all these things. In fact, even a lot of historic facts were told to them wrongly. For example, they believe, and you'll be very surprised to know, they believe that Jesus Christ was a Muslim. I mean, Islam actually came into existence 700 years after Jesus Christ. And yet they think that Jesus Christ was a Muslim, his parents were Muslim, and the whole world was Islamic before him. This is their belief.
Right.
They have no idea who Rani Yashovati was, who was our first queen, who was Raja Lalitaditya, who fought 3 different powers to protect Kashmir. You know, Tibetan invasion from one side, Arab invasion from one side, and someone from the north. He was actually fighting 3 powerful armies. He was such a superhero. I mean, he was such a super king, and he actually protected Kashmir. If it wasn't for him, today everybody in Kashmir would be speaking Tibetan. There would be no Kashmiri. So they have no idea of these historical heroes of their past. All that was erased, systematically erased, for them to believe that Kashmir was always Islamic, and they have always been Islamic from the start of the universe. And it's really, it's very sad that they have been misled to this extent. And well, things have started opening up now that social media is open for them. They've started finding out, and now that they're going to government institutions, they're going to proper schools, and they're starting to find out what real history was, who these people were. And I am taking an effort, but of course I can't do it all alone, but I have spoken to a few people to take this initiative to have little skits in schools and college, colleges, secondary schools and schools, for children to know what their history actually was. It's very imperative. And they're quite lost when it comes to their their roots.
Right. So Manuji, kind of building off of that, you're a storyteller, you're a historian. What scope do you see, or what opportunities would you like to see invested in that do bring to light these stories that have been lost, the history of Kashmir, whether it's, from thousands of years back to even 900 years back? What might people of civil society, people who have resources and want to channel them towards this sort of endeavor, what scope is there?
The scope is tremendous, Suhag, because, similar thing has happened in the Jammu region. And I'm taking the opportunity of talking about Jammu because this is a good balance here, with Yana talking about Kashmir and me about Jammu. So what she mentioned, that Kashmir has been fed with wrong stories or false stories, ridiculous stories. Jammu has been fed with nothing. So you have 2 sets of people, one with lies and one with complete vacuum. They weren't told the stories because the fear of the political leadership that we had from Kashmir, who governed the state, their fear was that if we tell them the stories and we show them the mirror that you are a sher, this is like a Singh Avalokan, that you are actually a lion, they will begin to roar. And they will begin to roar, and these people who have created this state, consolidated these mountain territories, hill kingdoms, would suddenly remember that, and in 1947, fought against the Pakistani invaders who were looting and raping women, again, women a victim of the conflict. They would suddenly remember and find a voice for themselves. So they have been in Jammu region stripped of their identity, their history, and it's rendered them completely, as Yana said, they are lost. They don't know who they are. What they have been drilled with is that everybody from outside Jammu and Kashmir is the other, he's outsider, he or she is different. So even those connections which could have possibly come, between the people of Jammu and Kashmir and people of other states from Jammu and Kashmir, that hasn't been allowed to happen. So there is no question of anybody from Jammu region also knowing that they went and took part in the Goa Liberation War happening so far down south. They have no idea because this has not come out in the open. They have no idea that there were schools and Jabran schools. Primary education was made free in Kashmir by the Dogra Maharajas. Dogra Maharajas have been vilified. They've been made into villains. We don't know about a Brigadier Rajinder Singh so much, who fought in Uri and protected Srinagar and fought against the tribal raiders and Pakistani junior commissioned officers who were raping women and walking off with all that loot. They don't know this. So I think there is so much scope, and it has to, as Yana said, we can, as individuals and as community organizations, and she's part of media, we can tell these stories, but we really need state sponsorship. We need the history to be told, in the schools, in the school textbooks, activities around, as she was saying, skits and more discussions and more seminars. And there is so much to be done because nothing has been done at all till now. And it's been more than 7 decades since 1947.
Yeah, exactly. Well, every time I have an opportunity to talk with either one of you, I learn something new, and I'm sure that's been the experience of our audience. So I want to thank both of you for an excellent conversation on increasing the visibility and offering a narrative about women in India, and particularly in the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir, that's shaped also by women and their lived experiences. Before we close out, I do want to give both of you an opportunity for any final remarks, any things that you are personally working on that you want to elicit the support of our audience today. So Yana Ji, if you want to start first.
No, I'll give the stage to Manu Ji. I'll follow.
I'm so grateful because for a Dogra, for a woman from Jammu region to be on a stage where she's talking to so many people from outside Jammu and Kashmir, this has never happened before. So I think when Dogra women or women from Punch and Rajouri and Pahadi women and Gujar women, when they see something like this happening, it gives them hope. So I consider that, if all this that is happening can inspire another young 5, women from Jammu region or from Kashmir, it is going to make a tremendous difference. And all I can request is that continue to have this conversation with us, not the people of Jammu and Kashmir, with Jammuites and with Kashmiris, continue to have these conversations, be interested. If you do not see us being represented in conversations around this subject, around Jammu and Kashmir, please question it. Till now, we've never questioned that the single story on Kashmir, the single story on Jammu and Kashmir. We've not questioned why aren't there Kashmiri Hindus here, or why isn't there a Dogra woman here or a Gujar woman here. I think we as audience, we as content receivers, we should start asking this and looking for, promoting, disseminating this information, be curious and pass on and share these stories.
Thank you. Yana Ji?
So I guess it's the conclusion. So I'm just going to say that I'm thankful too that we're being given this platform to speak, and there is a counter argument on Kashmir that is coming from people who live in Jammu and Kashmir, and not from their so-called representatives who are living outside Jammu and Kashmir for the past so many years and they've not been a part of whatever we've been through, and the world would be really kind to give a platform to those who lived here, those who've seen it all, those who've come out of it, those who can feel the change. Give them a platform rather than giving it to your trusted sources who've not stepped into Jammu and Kashmir for so many decades. So I would only request them, please be a balanced audience. And yes, I do hope that our conversations culminate into something, because there's a lot of work that needs to be done, like we mentioned all throughout the conversation. And I'm grateful to HAF that, you guys gave us this platform, and that we do hope that we continue to get such platforms to speak on behalf of the people living here.
Well, thank you so much. We're so incredibly grateful for your work, your courage, and your persistence and your dedication. And I want to also thank all our other wonderful panelists and moderators who joined us today for excellent conversations of some particularly difficult issues for our community. All of our panelists cut through rhetoric and provided an honest and realistic assessment of where we are and where we are as a community, and where we need to go, in fact, in our understanding of incredibly complex issues and in our advocacy endeavors. And I feel really optimistic in our community's capacity to counter negativity and spread truth. Positive news is news. As we conclude our program,
Absolutely.
Yes, I want to thank all of you for joining us today. Please stay tuned for follow-up communications from the Hindu American Foundation with highlights from today's program, along with other resources. If once you get those highlights, if you know friends who missed out on today's wonderful programming, be sure to share our programming with them. And thank you very much. Namaste and good afternoon.